Although I'm still not Corey, and I'm also pretty sure that I'm not homophobic. But that is more than I can say for Ben Shapiro, who made a video about why the pride flag shouldn't be flown at military bases, and also spoke a lot about why he just doesn't like it. Before we check out this video, you should check out my Patreon, and maybe my merch too. All of the links are in the description. Let's see what Ben Shapiro has to say about the pride flag.
I mean, the flag looks, frankly, like a cat vomited, and then you looked at it through a kaleidoscope. Visually incoherent. But that's sort of the idea, right? The idea is we can only be unified in opposition to something else.
Look, I don't love how the flag looks either, but I think that's a bit of a stretch to be like, flag ugly, therefore we can only be unified in opposition. I mean, it doesn't really make sense, Ben, does it? That's not really the point. The point is to come together because LGBT people have been pushed out from elsewhere. That's kind of why we need the flag, right? Not because we're like, oh yeah, stay away straight people. It's more because straight people have been like, stay away you lot. Like, you're mixing this one up, mate.
Because we don't share any values. We can only be unified in opposition to another thing.
Okay. So we can be unified in some values. I mean, let me tell you some of these values. I mean, the first one is that flag kind of unifies everyone that is LGBT, because everyone that's LGBT has faced some kind of oppression or discrimination due to being LGBT. That's kind of the point. The second thing, that this pride flag, the value that this pride flag is supposed to represent, is pride in being LGBT. I know we buried the lead a little bit there, Ben, but I know you're a smart guy. I'm sure you could have figured that one out. The main value of the LGBT pride flag is to have pride in being LGBT. It's in the name, mate. It's in the name.
The complete redefinition of courage, based on a deep, abiding desire to build a coalition to tear down all of the systems of definition, the heterosexual patriarchy, the cisgender patriarchy, all of the systems and hierarchies of power that have been imbued in our society. All those have to be torn down. And the minute you declare yourself not living in accordance with those things, you are a person who is brave.
I mean, well, right. Here's the thing. When you announce that you are LGBT, it is brave. And I'll tell you why. It's not because you're not living in accordance with patriarchal values. It's because people attack LGBT people. Because when you come out as LGBT or any of the other ones, you're putting a target on your back from people that don't like that group. That's why it's a brave thing. Not because you're saying, oh, screw this to the patriarchy. None of that. I mean, that can be a part of it. Sure, you know, being openly queer, there is some of that in there. But the main thing is more that people don't like LGBT people, and they attack them, and they treat them poorly, and they treat them differently than they treat straight people.
You're a person who is courageous. That is, I think, the deeper philosophical point that is being made, that is buried well underneath these sort of tweets that Joe Biden is sending out.
Ben, look, I don't think Joe Biden is saying, if you declare yourself as not living in accordance with the cisgender or heterosexual patriarchy, then you are brave. That's not the deeper meaning there. It is brave to be truthful about that part of your life when it's going to get you undue discrimination. That is a brave thing. It's courageous to do that. Are you just jealous that you can't come out, Ben? Is that what it is? Are you a little bit jealous that no one's calling you courageous? Come on, man. Like, you are smart. Why are you making such dumb statements? Why do you have such awful takes here? It's just silly.
All these members of the woke who are patting each other on the back for their bravery and their courage, even though they don't actually get along inside their own halls of power, right? They have serious disagreements. There are serious disagreements, for example, in the LGBT community between the L's and the T's.
Okay, right. Here's the thing, Ben. In any group, there are going to be disagreements, especially when, you know, being LGBT doesn't mean you have any real core values shared necessarily, right? Other than like maybe pride in being LGBT. But this sort of disagreement you're saying between the L's and the T's is transphobia. So the reason that there's a disagreement there is because one group is saying, hey, I don't think this group should feel pride for being trans. And the other group is saying, I think we should. I think that's fine. I think being trans is a thing that's okay. So it's a really weird way to paint this, that like, oh, there's disagreements in the LGBT halls. They don't get along. Well, I mean, yeah, sure. That's like saying, oh, there's disagreements amongst women. Some of the women, the white women, they don't agree with the black women, you know? Because they don't think that the black women should be treated the same. That's what you're saying there, Ben. Because there's disagreements due to bigotry within a group, that calls into question the validity of the group itself. That's just a really silly argument to make. Sure, there are transphobes that are LGBT. I would be surprised if there weren't. The majority of LGBT people disagree with transphobia. that is a good thing. Like, it is a good thing that there are disagreements. You can't be like one sort of hegemonic hive mind. People will disagree. I don't understand why you're bringing this up as though it's some kind of gotcha or even like a salient point. It is completely pointless to bring this up because there are disagreements amongst every group, and there are bigots in almost every group that dislike other members of that group. What is your point here?
You have trad feminists and traditional lesbians in open battle with transgender rights advocates who, of course, argue that there is no definition of man and woman that is not absolutely malleable. Right? Lesbians argue that there is such a thing as a woman, and we are women who are sexually attracted to women. And then you have transgender rights advocates who argue that a man who identifies as a woman is now a woman. So there is no such thing as a woman. And if you are a woman who is not attracted to a trans woman, then this means that you are in some way sexist.
Okay, Ben, you know that's not the case. There are incredibly few people. In fact, I don't really think I've ever actually seen someone say that not being attracted to a trans person is transphobic. I've not actually seen someone say that not being attracted to a trans woman is sexist. I have seen people say that people are saying that, but where are the actual people that are saying it is absolutely, unequivocally transphobic to not be attracted to a trans person? No one is actually saying that. The point that is being made is that trans women are women, and being attracted to trans women is something that a lesbian can do. You don't have to be attracted to trans women. No one is saying that you absolutely have to be, but being exclusive, like excluding trans women from womanhood is transphobic. That is the point that's being made. There's not the point that there is no such thing as a man or a woman. It's just that the concept of woman is different than your concept of woman, right? Because if your concept of woman is someone who is of the female sex, then that doesn't really gel with really how we deal with things in reality. The way we're looking at this is that there's more to being a woman than just being female. That is the main point of contention, and you are grossly oversimplifying it and flat out lying about what trans rights activists are saying. You're framing this debate as though it's a reasonable one, when really it's not. It's one born out of bigotry, right? It's trans people fighting against bigots. That is the point here. I don't have the time to get into the concept of gender and why you're wrong about it, but the fact is that just because trans people exist, it doesn't mean that there's no such thing as a man or a woman. It's just the separation of sex and gender. It's pretty much that simple. Men and women can still absolutely exist. That's why trans women are trans women, right? Because the concept of woman still exists. We're just separating it from the idea of binary sex. That is the point. It's fairly straightforward, and I know, Ben, you're a smart enough person to understand this. You're just choosing not to.
Right? There's all sorts of internal schisms and battles that are going on inside the woke community. But if everybody pats each other on the back for their courage in taking on the higher goal, which is tearing down the system as a whole, then we are ushered into a new utopian vision.
Again, dude, like, there are schisms in any community, and I would really hardly call sort of transphobes the woke. Just because you're LGBT, it doesn't mean you're woke. Silly phrase to use, but painting all LGBT people as the woke is just ridiculous. LGBT people are LGBT. They can be anything else outside of that. The only thing that joins them is that they're LGBT. Again, any group filled with a lot of people that are only connected by sort of one trait, you're gonna have people that disagree. You are. The whole idea of tearing down those systems oppress LGBT people, right? The system that we want to tear down is the one that is oppressive to LGBT people. And I mean, if you disagree with that, then essentially what you're saying is that you're fine with continued oppression and sort of violence against LGBT people, right? That is what you are okay with. Otherwise, you would be perfectly happy to have that system torn down. And in tearing down the system, you can still have what you already have. You just don't get to be sort of homophobic or transphobic. That's all it is. No one is taking anything from you except for the homophobia and transphobia. But if you want to cling on to that, Ben, by all means, just come out and say it. Just say it.
Okay, and that coalition, it is almost hysterically funny how fragmentary this coalition is, and how how clear it is that the goal is to cobble together a coalition of people who disagree about nearly everything under a rubric of resistance.
You say cobble together as though any broad group has every single member agree with each other on everything. There are many things that Republicans disagree with each other on, but they all come together as the GOP so that they can achieve their shared goals. Same with Democrats. Same with almost any political party. Same with pretty much any group that isn't entirely specific. If you have a group that is made around a couple shared values, you're gonna have people that disagree on other things. That's kind of inevitable. Either you call people like a hive mind because they agree on everything, or you're saying this, like, oh, they can't agree on anything, they're just cobbled together around this one issue. Here's the thing, man, LGBT people don't want to be oppressed, so it makes sense that they would come together, despite having disagreement on other things, to stop being oppressed, to stop being discriminated against. It is incredibly straightforward, and you're just peddling this nonsense to your audience because you know they'll eat it up.
So I have to take just the most obvious visual manifestation of this. The Progress Pride flag has been redesigned by an intersex activist to include intersex people. A yellow triangle with a purple circle in it has been added to represent intersex people, community, and rights. Usually the goal of a flag is, of course, to unify, right? We all look at a symbol, and we all recognize our shared humanity in that particular symbol. You look at the American flag, and it represents the states and represents the original colonies, and you say, wow, that's our history. That's my flag. The new Progress Pride flag is not about the idea that there's any sort of shared values. The idea here is that you have your individual stripe in the flag, right? It's a coalitional flag.
Oof. It is interesting that you say you have your individual stripe in the flag, Ben, after having mentioned the American flag. Because hasn't the American flag been updated 27 times? It has, by the way. There have been 26 versions of the American flag. And when a new state is added to the Union, do you know what they do? They add another little star. Yeah, the American flag is a coalition flag. The American flag has a star for each state because each state wants to be represented on the flag. That's how they can come together. This is the thing about LGBT people, right? We are a very disparate group in that there are many different experiences, and sometimes other groups of LGBT people get forgotten about. For example, intersex people are often left behind. Trans people are often left behind. LGBT people of colour are often left behind. That's why people have added these to the flag to more prominently display them. Because yes, while the rainbow flag does include everyone, and no one would really get onto you for flying the rainbow flag, if you want to more sort of clearly state, hey, I am actually remembering intersex people, I'm actually remembering trans people and people of colour, I'm including them in my activism, I'm including them in this pride, you can use the Progress Pride flag. No one is forcing you to use it. No one is saying this is the only flag you can use. It's just another option if you want to more clearly show that you are remembering these groups. Because as I said, LGBT people, they're a large group. There are some LGBT people who are bigoted against other groups. There are some gay men who don't know very much about trans people. There are trans people who don't know very much about intersex people. There are people that are white and LGBT that don't really know much about the struggles of LGBT people of colour and how all that intersects. The point is that having these flags puts those more front and centre. If you want to be more obvious about your support of these groups, if you want to just sort of display that you're aware of these groups existing and you're including them, you can use those flags. This isn't about sort of saying, oh, we're all different and we all need our little space on the flag. It's more just, these are groups that are consistently left behind. And while they are included under the rainbow flag, this is a more visual way of including them, to force people to remember that they exist. Because unfortunately, a lot of LGBT people are out of touch with a lot of the rest of the LGBT community, because it's very broad. That is the point here. It is not a big deal. It is not harmful or dangerous. It's not about people sort of, oh, I need to get my little space. It's just, hey, remember these people exist. That's all. You can use this one if you want to. Or you can use the rainbow flag, because the rainbow flag still includes everyone. But if you want to be more prominent with your inclusion, if you want to say, hey, I am remembering you, and I do support you, you can do that. That's fine. No one is saying that you have to. You can say it's virtue signaling, but really it's more just a case of like, hey, this is a safe place for you too. Because unfortunately, while the rainbow flag should include everyone, some people that use it don't include everyone, right? No one is saying that this is the only flag that exists. In fact, like, if that was the case, then we wouldn't be seeing just the simple rainbow flag anywhere since the last flag was made. But that's not what happens, man. It's just another flag. It's just some colors. Why are you getting so mad about some colors that people use to feel happy? This is not even about you. Honestly, this has no bearing on your life. Why do you care? And here's the thing, by the way, like, I don't really like the look of the progress flag. I probably won't use the progress flag because, you know, I don't personally like it. And that's fine. You know, it's totally fine. No one's gonna have it go at me for not liking how that flag looks and using a different flag, because it's fine. It is honestly perfectly fine. You don't need to love this flag. You don't need to vocally hate it. You can just let it exist for the people that want to use it, because it's not impacting you whatsoever.
At least the original pride flag is something visually pretty to look at, right? I mean, it's just a rainbow flag. Here you have apparently some sort of invasion from the left side of the screen. Like it looks like a military movement from the left side of the screen. That's black, brown, blue, pink, white, yellow with a purple circle.
Jesus, Ben, come on! Do some colors coming in from one side look like a military movement to you? That's probably more indicative of how you feel about LGBT people than it is about the actual flag itself. And you know what? Like I said, I don't really like the look of that flag very much. It's a little bit loud. It's a little bit busy. It's not really for me. But you know what? Some people like it. And that's fine. There are other LGBT flags that I don't like the pansexual flag. I'm not a huge fan of the colors of it. I'm just not. But do you think I'd say to any pansexual people, like, no, don't use that flag. You should use the bi flag because pan is under the bi umbrella anyway, and that's an ugly... No, I just let people do what they want. What I think about how a flag looks really doesn't matter that much because I'm going to use that flag. Ben, you can dislike how the flag looks, but also, since you're not LGBT, as far as I'm aware, it doesn't matter. You don't need to care about it at all. It is just fine for people to use it if they want. And I sound like a broken record, but here's the thing, man. It is fine. This is like me coming to your house and telling you I don't like your curtains. Ugh, Ben, you've got disgusting curtains in your home. Why are you using those curtains? Ugh, at least your old curtains were nice. Like they appealed to my sensibilities. But these curtains? No thank you. Who cares? They're not my f***ing curtains, man.
I mean, it's just visually incoherent. But that's sort of the idea. Eventually, we're going to reach the point where, in opposition to the unified flags that are provided by countries, we're going to end up with flags in which every single human has their own little dot. We're going to have pixelated flags with 330 million dots, one to represent you. And if your dot isn't represented in the flag doesn't represent you anymore. Right? The idea is we can only be unified in opposition to something else because we don't share any values. We can only be unified in opposition to another thing.
You know, you can keep on saying it, but it doesn't make it true. People that are LGBT are not unified just against something else, unless you say that thing is oppression. They are unified in their pride in being LGBT. That's why it's called the pride flag, man. It's not the gay agenda to replace all American flags with rainbow flags with 1 million dots. Shut the actual up. Come on. It's like saying that the US flag exists in opposition to Britain because America used to be owned by Britain and then they fought against Britain and they left. It unifies f***ing Americans. And yeah, initially it unified Americans against Britain, but that doesn't mean that it's all that it's about. The LGBT flag unifies LGBT people in their pride in being LGBT, and it can also represent the fight against oppression. That doesn't mean it only exists in opposition to something else, and it's stupid that you continue to say that over and over and over and over.
Which is why it is kind of important that the Department of Defense is refusing to fly the pride flag. Okay, so there is a big uproar inside the Biden administration. The State Department decided they were going to fly the pride flag at the State Department. First of all, this is insipid. Okay, the only flag that should fly at the American State Department is in fact the American flag. That is the only unifying flag in American life. We shouldn't have flags with a giant cross on it. We should not have a gay pride flag. We should not have any of those flags because, again, the American flag is non-sectarian. The American flag is supposed to represent all of us because we are all American.
See, this is the thing. This is something that you seem to not be able to understand. You can say that the American flag is supposed to represent all of us, right? You're supposed to represent all of you, sure. But it doesn't necessarily, right? Like, America has historically been pretty not cool to gay people. The whole don't ask, don't tell thing. Not allowing gay people to marry. All of that stuff, right? If the American flag truly was supposed to represent every single American, then every single American would have equal rights and equal access to resources. But they don't. There is severe inequality in America, and the American flag represents that to an extent as well. So, yeah, it makes sense that LGBT people could feel more sort of connection to the LGBT pride flag than they do to the American flag, because America has historically not been that great to them. The same for black people. I'm sure there are a lot of black people that think, ooh, not so hot on the American flag, because it represents racism, right? It represents the systemic oppression of black people. The American flag should, in theory, be a unifying thing for all Americans, but in practice, it isn't necessarily, because America isn't really for all Americans.
Nonetheless, Joe Biden has decided that all Americans are apparently in support of the entire LGBTQ plus 2AAIZ agenda.
Funny joke. Yes, there's too many little letters on the end of the LGBTQIA plus whatever. Okay, cool, man. You wanna pop back to 2015 and give them their joke back? That was an old joke as well. Who cares? See, we can all play this game of making shitty old jokes. It is fun, isn't it? Really, man, like, cool. There are lots of different acronyms to represent lots of different people that are LGBT. You can just say LGBT+. It's fine. You can just say LGBTQ. It's fine. You don't need to make this little jab every time. It's not as funny or as cool as you think it is.
Therefore, we're going to fly this at the State Department, but only in countries where nobody's going to do anything about it. We're definitely not going to do that in, like, Malaysia. We're certainly not going to do it in Saudi Arabia. We're not going to do it anywhere in the Middle East, actually.
See, this is the thing, right? You're not going to do it in all those different areas that are hostile to LGBT people. And I think that's kind of crappy, but probably for a different reason than you. Yeah, you can say it's virtue signaling, and you know what? I would agree. I think that if the sort of government is doing this, if they are only flying it in places where it is safe to do so, it shows that they don't really support LGBT people that much, right? And by saying that, oh yeah, all of America is in support of the LGBTQ agenda, right? Well, they're not. The point is that there's not. There's a lot of homophobic Americans, there's a lot of transphobic Americans, and flying that flag is showing, right? Is showing LGBT people that this is a place that is for them. You can't say, oh yeah, America is for all Americans, that flag represents all Americans, and then in the next sentence say, oh yeah, you can't say that all Americans support LGBT people. If Americans don't support LGBT people, if America is a hostile place for LGBT people, then I don't think the American flag can really comfortably represent LGBT people, can it, Ben? To get back to the point of, like, not flying it in places where it's not necessarily safe to do so, it shows the hypocrisy of the US government, absolutely. And I'm sure most LGBT people would agree with you that is a kind of crappy thing to do. It's basically just sort of paying lip service to caring about LGBT people. Because here's the thing, the US doesn't really have that strong of a support for LGBT people. That's why the pride flag is still needed, right? That's why LGBT people are coming together, because there are not many people that actually have their best interests at heart, right? America will, put on a veneer of acceptance for LGBT people, put on a veneer of support, but they won't actually do what is needed to support and stop discrimination of LGBT people. LGBT.
Well, the Defense Department announced yesterday that they are not going to be flying the pride flag over military bases. First of all, the fact that this was even an issue, the fact that we were even having the discussion about flying pride flags over military bases is somewhat insane, right? Why exactly would we fly a pride flag over a military base? The reason that we, why? Literally the people who are fighting unless you're willing to put soldiers in battle with the pride flag on their sleeve, right? So they're living and dying on behalf of the LGBT agenda, apparently.
Here's the thing, Ben. There are soldiers that are LGBT, right? And the military has been, and still is, a hostile place for LGBT people. There was just the trans military ban that was recently sort of repealed. So flying an LGBT pride flag, flying that flag, is to show, hey, this is a place that accepts you. Now, I disagree with it. I do disagree with it. I disagree with it because it's paying lip service to acceptance, because the military is still not a place that the LGBT community is actually fully accepted. So to fly a flag to say this is a place where we can accept you, it's not really truthful. That's why I have an issue with it. You have an issue with it, clearly because you just don't like LGBT people. You don't want America accepting them.
Why? It is sectarian by nature. There's open debate about the extent to which Americans support every aspect of the agenda promoted by radical activists. The idea that this is representative of some sort of unified body of opinion in the United States is kind of crazy.
The idea that the American flag is representative of some unified form of opinion in the US, I can also call that into question, because there are many things that the US does that many Americans disagree with. There are many things that happen in the US that Americans don't agree with. Like, there is a massive divide in the US between the left and the right, between many groups of people. And so why should the American flag represent Americans? If you're going to apply that to, the LGBT flag, what is the American flag representing other than just people who are in America? By that logic, it's the same as the LGBT flag representing people that just are LGBT, right? This doesn't really hold up. There is nothing sort of better about the American flag when compared to the LGBT flag, right? They are both just some colors that are made to represent some kind of idea. And here's the thing, when it comes to ideas, a lot of people will disagree on them. People will disagree on almost any idea. People disagree on what America is supposed to mean. People disagree on what the LGBT pride flag is supposed to mean. That doesn't mean that they are any less meaningful. It just means that people disagree on stuff. There is a general unified idea of what America is supposed to be and what the American flag is supposed to represent. The same goes for the LGBT flag. And by talking about the radical agenda of some LGBT activists, What the hell are you talking about, Ben? Are you talking about just fully accepting LGBT people, letting gay people get married, letting trans people exist as who they are? Are those the radical things that you're talking about, Ben? What the hell is it? Seriously. Because there are radical Americans, right? There are American terrorists. Are we gonna, stop using the American flag because some people that are very radical use it? No, that is idiotic. You just don't like LGBT people, and so you have an issue with people showing their support for them.
Fairly incredible. So they've decided to ban all flags except the American flag because you might want to fly like a Don't Tread on Me flag, and that would be super duper duper bad. Again, these things matter because when we talk about what unifies us as a country or what unifies us as a society, shared ideas of what courage is, or shared ideas of what the good is, or shared idea of what represents the good life for Americans, these are basic ideas we should share, but we no longer share them, and so we're falling apart as a country.
Ben, come on. When have people ever... If people always shared the same basic idea of what good is or of what courage is, then there wouldn't have been disagreements. There have always been disagreements. That is the point, right? Otherwise, you would have one singular political party. You wouldn't need to vote. You wouldn't need to have any kind of democracy because everyone would agree. And you know what? A difference in ideas is probably a good thing because it can lead to better ideas because you need to support and defend your idea against opposing ones. And this disagreement on what courage is, that is such a broad, nonsensical statement. I'm sure there are plenty of LGBT people that agree with you on what courage is. You just don't think it's courageous to come out as LGBT because you don't like LGBT people. That's what it seems like, man. That is genuinely what it seems like. When you're saying that, oh, we have these disagreements and we used to all agree on this. No, they fucking didn't. No, you fucking didn't. Because all throughout history, the entirety of American history, people have disagreed on People have disagreed on core values of America. The fucking Civil War, Ben. The fact that almost, every major war has had people protesting it. There have always been disagreements on what the core values of America are. One of the ideas of America was that, all men are created equal, except for black people who aren't actual people. That was something that went contested. Is that one of the values that you want to go back to? What the fuck are you talking about, man? What the fuck are you talking about? There was no point in American history, there was no point in anyone's history where every single member agreed on core values because people disagree on all of the time. All of the goddamn time. You are saying this to your audience because you know that they won't think about it. They'll just accept what you say. But the fact is that there has not been a point in American history where the entire country has had this shared value. Except for maybe, you could argue that back when information was coming from a singular source, back when there was less education. But in that case, you just want people to know less so they agree with you. Right? LGBT people are not the problem. Accepting LGBT people is not the problem. Thinking that coming out is courageous is not the problem. The problem is you don't like LGBT people, Ben. You just don't. So you're trying to come up with reasons for it. And it's fine. You can just dislike LGBT people. You can do that. Just say that. Don't try and harken back to a time in American history when people agreed on core values of courage and what America is supposed to mean. Because it's bullshit. That was way before you were born, if it ever existed at all.
Who's got two thumbs and wants you to like and subscribe?
Who's got two thumbs and thinks Ben Shapiro is a total muppet? Yeah, look, here's the thing, man. Ben Shapiro seems like a really smart guy, and he just absolutely talks his audience because I really feel like they won't dig into it. They won't actually think about it for themselves. They'll just accept what he says as gospel. But when you actually think about it, what he says is pretty empty. It doesn't mean very much at all. So, good job, Ben. Well done for taking 7 minutes to say absolutely nothing. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel and perhaps like the video and share the video or comment on the video. Let me know what you thought. Also, if you'd like to become a patron, you can become a patron. We've got patron names right here. Your name could be here if you'd like. You can also get my merch. You could also, follow my other social medias down there. Like I said, I'd like to thank my patrons with a very special thank you to Sarah, Rachie May, and Renegade. It is very, very hot. You can see me sweating. I think I will go and perish now. Goodbye.